Like, I want money. What is money? How does credit work? What's fractional reserve banking? All these things we now know to be the biggest cons of the century, right? So I'm sitting there researching money for days and days and days. And then I get more mad because I'm like, whoa, money's trash and I don't have any. Did that, you know, everyone puts their money in the bank and the bank takes some of other people's money and lends it out. I didn't know they invented it from the sky. I still at that point thought money was linked to gold. I didn't know nothing.
All right, boom. Back like I never left, and here because I never lied. Today, we're going to talk about the monetary system from beginning to now and how it's changed over time. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to get right into it. 3000 BCE, we start with the barter system. What's the barter system? Basically, what you're doing is if you have crops or you have tools or anything that you have of value, you're trading it with somebody else for what they have of value. So for example, if I grow corn and I want to trade it with somebody who grows watermelon, we do an even exchange and then we go about our way. Now, obviously this has limitations, right? If I'm fishing and I get a fish and I want to bring it back and trade it for somebody's donkey, it's not even. And according to the ASPCA, you're not allowed to chop a donkey's leg off in order to exchange for a fish. So, 600 BCE, that's when coinage is invented, right? Gold and silver formed into coins, and they were used to exchange goods and services. Why were they viable as the first money? What? Here's the 6 basic reasons. 1, medium of exchange, right? You're using them in exchange for a good or service. Unit of account. 3, portable. Obviously, you can walk around with a pocket full of coins. Fungible, meaning interchangeable. They're all the same value if they're the same weight. 5, durable. Obviously, gold and silver have been around for thousands of years. And most importantly, 6, a store of value, meaning they have remained valuable for thousands of years. That's going to be the most important one. Moving on. All right, so now it's 600 BCE, right? You're a baller. You're walking around and you got a pocket full of coins, gold and silver in your pocket, and you're doing your thing, right? Then, oh no, the YN's got you at dagger point and you got to hand over all your money. Now you're SOL. So that happens to enough people to where a group of people come together and say, give us your money, we'll put it in the vault and keep it safe for you, right? And they will give you a certificate that authenticates how much you have with us. And that's the formation of a bank. So like I said, you're depositing your gold and silver, they're giving you a slip that says how much you have deposited with them, aka an IOU, and that's where you have your first currency, aka IOU. And if you look at it, currency has all these same factors as money, except the store value over time, and that's what we're going to explore today. All right, now I'm about to hit y'all over the head with a little bit of math, right? Stick with me. If currency is how much the bank owes you, then currency technically equals debt, right? Now, if that didn't make sense at all, stick with me. We're gonna come back to it. So how does a bank earn money? They take your deposit and they loan it out for interest. So a quick example, right? Most people buy homes via loan from the bank. So if you take 100,000 and they loan it out at 5% interest rate, most home loans are 30 years. The person that takes the $100,000 loan in this equation ends up paying back $193,255 from a loan of $100,000. So basically, what the bank is doing, they're taking your money, your deposits, they're loaning it out, and they're receiving the interest. So their cut is $93,000 off of loaning your money. That sounds like a one-sided deal to me, but who am I? All right, now it's time to introduce another concept. We're gonna put the bank back because they ain't done with their BS. Now we're gonna talk about fractional reserve lending. What is that? That is basically the bank has to have 10% of all deposits on hand. So if they have $1 million worth of deposits in their bank, they have to keep at least 100,000 of it in the bank until 2020, COVID, a lot going on. Now this 10% is reduced to 0. What's the implications of this? Well, if they have $1 million and they loan the whole $1 million out, then they have nothing in the bank. Seems like a problem. These factors are why when you try to go and withdraw your money from the bank, they want to give you an attitude, call the police on you. Right? They damn near hit you in your mouth with some goddamn money like this is ATL.
Oh, you some money? Here you go. Oh, shit. Yeah, I'm tired of that. It was so disrespectful.
This didn't happen out of nowhere. Let's go back in time and talk about why the system is like this. Let's start with the early 1900s, right? You have around banks and 7,500 national banks, but they have some problems. Clearing checks, right? This is 1900, they don't have a computer system. So from state to state, the checks might have problems clearing, which makes it easier to commit fraud and things like that. Second and most important, frequent bank runs. What's a bank run? Like I was telling you, when people go to withdraw their money that they put in the bank and the bank doesn't have enough funds on hand. Say Bob goes to bank ABC to go withdraw his money, his whole account, and you know they're gonna give him an attitude, but then they finally do it. And he says to Jim, he's like, Jim, I just went to the bank and they wasn't trying to give me my money. I don't know, there's something fishy going on. So Jim goes to the bank. Now he tries to withdraw his money. Now they're giving him an attitude. So he does the same thing. Now, you know what? Everybody wants to withdraw their money. That's what you call a bank run. Then pretty soon, everybody running up in there like Ice Cube from NWA, smashing up the offices because they can't get their money. And 3, no lender of last resort. So basically a bigger bank that, if we are having bank runs, can give you that money that you need to honor people's withdrawal requests. So that's why now banks have FDIC insurance. Okay, so obviously this is a mess, right? Now we're gonna switch to red because this is where it gets scary. We're gonna go to 1910, right? And you have a group of wealthy businessmen, bankers, and investors who go to Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, right? So what are they doing at Jekyll Island? They are masterminding what's called the Federal Reserve. This isn't the first central bank, but it's the current one that we have, so that's why we're gonna focus on it. So 1913, it actually becomes official. So 1913 Federal Reserve. To start, it's not federal. It's owned by a small, unknown, private group of people. 2, doesn't have any reserves. Take that how you want it. So what does the Federal Reserve do? It controls interest rates, right? So what they do is the Federal Reserve is the central bank of the US. So they set the interest rate where they want it, right? So say it's 4%. Now your local bank has to go off of whatever interest rate the Fed sets to set theirs, right? So let's say if the Fed sets their interest rate at 4%, your bank might start loaning out money at 5% because they can't go lower than the Fed. Okay, pop quiz. What happened in 1929? The Great Depression. How great was it? Not sure, wasn't there. How depressing was it? I'm sure it was very depressing. Obviously, the Great Depression, US is in financial trouble. So what happens because of this? 1, more bank runs. / failures. 2, obviously they weren't loaning out any more money. 3, FDR. FDR, aka Franklin Delano Roosevelt, issued a bank holiday. So what's a bank holiday? Well, all these people smashing up the offices to get their money. And he said, okay, so we're gonna close the banks, all the banks for a couple days to stop the bank run. Good for the banks, not good for you. And lastly, FDIC insurance was actually created. The money that you deposit in the bank is federally insured. At that time, it was only $2,500. Now it's $250,000. Boom. Okay, so we're gonna pick up over here, 1939 to 1945. What happens in this period? Kanye's mans starts World War II. Boom. And World War II ends the Great Depression. Why? Because all the men are out fighting in the war, obviously, and the women are in factories, and all the weapons and equipment that we need boost the economy. So, 1939, the Great Depression ends. Okay, 1944, Bretton Woods Conference. Now, the conference of financial powerhouses, I wasn't invited. Hopefully I'll be at the next one. But what happened during this time? Number 1, fixed exchange rates, right? So $1 US might be, I don't know, 1,000,000 pesos, right? But then the next day, that same US dollar might be 10 pesos. Obviously that's problematic. So they created fixed exchange rates between currencies between countries. The US dollar was convertible to gold, right? At $35 per ounce. So $35 equals 1 ounce of gold, 1944. If you remember the lesson earlier, that's much like the inception of currency, right? You can take your money, your $35, and go and exchange it for gold from a bank, because this gold is the money and the dollar is the currency. 3, most importantly, the US became the world reserve currency. So what does that mean? The world reserve currency. Because the US is pegged, to gold, and then all the other currencies are pegged, to the US dollar. The US dollar is basically the closest thing to money. So you have gold equals $35, and $35 equals fixed exchange rates, whatever other currency you have in the world. At this conference that I wasn't invited to, the IMF, aka the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank were created. IMF basically is a bigger central bank for all the smaller central banks of each country, right? So each country has their own central bank, and the IMF is basically the overseer of those. The World Bank was basically, they say, created to give loans to small developing countries. And remember, this is at the end of World War II, so they're giving loans also to countries that were basically destroyed during World War II so they can rebuild, according to them. Okay, so 1971, fast forward. This, all good. 1971, that's where it gets crazy. Hey Google, who took the dollar off the gold standard in 1971? They're not gonna believe me if I say it.
On the website federalreservehistory.org, they say, with inflation on the rise and a gold run looming, President Richard Nixon's team enacted a plan that ended dollar convertibility to gold and implemented wage and price controls, which soon brought an end to the Bretton Woods system.
There. 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So what does that mean? For every dollar circulating in the world, you have to have an equal amount of gold locked away to represent that dollar. Now, when you take that dollar off the gold standard, there's no limitations to how much US currency, aka dollars, can be in circulation. Problematic. Also, now you can't go to the bank anymore with your $35 and get 1 ounce of gold anymore. And another thing I want to add, so 1971, $1, about $7.90 now, right? So basically, how when old people say, oh, for a nickel I could do this and that, we don't care. But they aren't lying. So $1 in 1971, what you would get for that would cost you pretty much $8 now. Now gold in 1971, we already know it was $35 an ounce. What is it today, you might ask? I'm about to tell you. Now, each ounce of gold is 3,400. So what's the number one rule of economics? You should know, but since I've only made a couple videos so far, I'm gonna tell you. Number one rule of economics is supply and demand. The more supply you have, the less demand. The more scarce, the higher the demand. AKA, now, if you can just print dollars as much as you want, the more dollars you have, the less the value of each dollar is. And as you're printing more money and the value of whatever currency you're printing is going down because you're printing more money, that's what you call, hopefully you can see this, that's what you call inflation. We're gonna take inflation and now we're gonna add to that. All right, inflation. It takes more currency to buy the same goods and services. So how does inflation impact us? Well, inflation is bad on savers, right? Because if you're collecting all this money and you're hoarding it in a bank account, but it's sitting there losing value because they keep printing more, obviously that's not beneficial to you. So, who does inflation help? Inflation is bad for savers, great for investors. Now, why is it great for investors? Because investors have what you call assets, right? So let's look at it like a seesaw, right? You have assets over here and you have, let's just say dollar, right? So as the dollar decreases in value, your assets value increase because it takes more dollars now to buy the same assets. So if you have a $100,000 house and you hold it for 30 years, you might be able to get $300,000 for it. Why? Because the value of the dollar is decreasing over those 30 years. That's why people are complaining. Elderly people might have bought their house for $20,000, $30,000 and now they're selling it for $500,000. That wouldn't be the case if we didn't have inflation, if the dollar never went off the gold standard, we would be selling it for closer to the amount that they initially paid for their house. Don't be mad at them, just get your money up. But this is why investing in having assets is vital, because the current system that we live in, you can't help but have inflation. It's not going to go anywhere unless we completely change the monetary system that we have, which I don't see happening. So this is really the only thing you can do to combat it. And you know I'm a history buff, so I'm going to give you a quick example of another form of inflation, right? So you have Emperor Nero, who was a psychopath, obviously. He wanted to build a palace, but the Senate told him no. So being a psycho that he is, he took gold and silver coinage, he melted it down, and then he remade the same gold and silver coins, but he added lead to it, right? So you take a coin, you melt it down, you take a little bit out for yourself, set that to the side. Then they weighed their money at the time because it's gold and silver. So if you add a little bit of lead, it's going to weigh the same as it would before, but it's not as pure. It's not 100% gold or 100% silver. It has lead in it, which is devaluing it, right? Similar to this equation of inflation. So he remade the coins with the lead and then he put them back in circulation. Now he has all this gold and silver set to the side. He makes those into coins and then boom, you have the money to pay for your palace, right? But in both cases, you're cheating the population out of the value of their money. But for him, it didn't work. They figured it out and got on his ass. But I digress. Okay, the next level past inflation is hyperinflation. So what is hyperinflation? We already discussed that inflation is when your currency is losing value, right? Historically through US, it's been 2% inflation per year. So the value of the dollar is going down 2% per year. Obviously over the last couple of years, because they've been printing so much money, it's been around 10%, which is scary. But hyperinflation is where you want to start panicking. That's when your currency value is going down over 50% per month. At that point, you might as well start all over. That happened in 2010s in Venezuela. Now, one good thing that's keeping hyperinflation off the US dollar is the fact that it's used so globally. If you have all the dollars in the US, you're gonna feel the inflation more, but the fact that US dollars spread all over the world is basically exporting our inflation. That's good, but that may not be able to save us forever. Another key metric you wanna keep in mind when you're dealing with hyperinflation, or inflation for that matter, is food prices. It's said historically that once food prices reach 40% of the average salary, that's when riots begin and people start to overthrow the government. All right, so we got through a lot. We talked about the past, the present of money, aka currency. Now, I'm going to give you a couple scenarios of the future and you can do with them what you want. Worst case scenario, we get hyperinflation. Once the US dollar falls off, I think it's going to be a domino effect. So what other system can we implement to either save the dollar or restart? So most people would say, obviously, you need to use crypto. Okay, a lot of people will compare Bitcoin to gold because it had a lot of those metrics that made gold money. But crypto obviously has some drawbacks. So number one, right? So if there was ever a power grid attack or the power system just went down for some reason, you can't buy and sell crypto without a phone or a computer, right? It's not physically tangible. It's also susceptible to theft. You can be hacked and your crypto can be taken if you don't take the proper precautions, right? So it does have some merit, but these are two things that we have to keep in mind. Monetary system we can move to is actually going back to the gold standard. Remember, the original gold standard was $35 per 1 ounce of gold. One thing to keep in mind if you do this is that there's so much more dollars in circulation that the price of gold would have to account for it, right? So for each, in 1971, for each ounce of gold, you get $35. That wouldn't work anymore. So at minimum, gold would have to be $10,000 an ounce to account for the amount of money in circulation. Remember, once we went off the gold standard, the dollar printing just went crazy, right? So it's probably 1,000 times more money in circulation now than there was in 1971. So basically look at gold as a sponge, and they have to basically absorb all the US dollars in circulation, which would inflate their price to 10,000 very conservatively. I think it could be even higher than that. That's one thing to keep in mind. Another thing too with the gold standard is, I'm not a psychic and I don't have any inside information, but what I do know is, like I said in my other video, top 3 countries in the world, I would say US, China, and Russia, right? So what's one strategic move that at least these two have in common right now? They're buying up massive amounts of gold. How much gold? I don't know, ask them. They didn't tell me personally, but from what I found, China has currently in their reserve, according to them, 2,292 tons of gold, which has a worth of $208 billion. Russia has 2,336 tons in their possession, which has a value of $217.4 billion in gold. Hey Google, how much gold does the US have currently in their reserves?
8,134 metric tons. According to en.wikipedia.org, as of 2021, the U.S. gold reserves total 8,134 metric tons. The gold bars held in the depository are approximately 7 inches long, 3.5 inches wide,
Hey, yo.
and 3/4 inches thick.
I ain't asked for all that.
This amounts to a value of $480.84 billion, going by the price of gold at the beginning of January 2023.
2023. So 480 billion. With the value of 2023, obviously gold has gone up since then. So this is actually higher, but I'm not gonna research it right now. That's beyond the point. Just know we have the most gold in the world. So a new system based on gold would obviously, we would still be top dog, right? Let's look at another system. Okay, and the last scenario that I'm gonna suggest is that, bringing back the IMF, they'll basically run the world currency supply, and they'll issue it via special drawing rights, right? So I remember I said the IMF was basically the world's central bank. If we do go to another monetary system, it could be them controlling it. And instead of dollars, yuan, pesos, whatever, they have something called the special drawing right, which they'll issue to each country based on whatever metrics they decide. But one thing that might be good about that is I believe the currency that they're going to use would still be based off gold, which we do have the most of currently. So that could be good to still keep us number one. However, I think these two would be more beneficial to the average person, especially if you're an investor of gold. And I'm going to put /silver because I personally lean towards silver more than gold. I feel like the upside is more, right? This third one is up in the air. They have to take into consideration every single country and their needs. Now, we went through a lot. Definitely like, comment, subscribe. I'm not a professor, right? Or else I'll be being paid to explain those to you. I'm doing it for free. So I'll answer what I can. Any questions, put them in the comments. This is 101, right? We're gonna keep building on this and using this information that we went over now to expand in further videos, right? So I plan on starting a playlist with this information so that once you watch the first one, you can keep going and it can be sort of a course. But that's the video for today. It's hot as hell in the gym, so I'm out.